I'm Danny Sheehan. I am the Chief Counsel for the Lakota People's Law Office and am Chief Defense Counsel for Chase Ironhide. Chase, as you know, is the sole person who has been charged by the state of North Dakota with inciting the insurrection against the Dakota Access Pipeline Corporation. And I'm sad to say that he's not guilty of actually having done that. He participated with others in calling people to the scene to bear witness in a peaceful and prayerful manner, which was in fact characterized by the Tiger Swan Private Military Corporation as inciting terrorism. And as you know, there are a whole series of important details that we can share with you tonight about the present status of the case up there, what the nature of the defenses are, they're going to be raised, etc. What I want to do first, however, is I want to set this in the larger context so that we understand and appreciate what it is that's happening up there. Sarah has touched upon it in her opening statements, but it's important to understand that we, as we sit here tonight on September 6th of 2017, we are just about 10 months from that shocking night when Donald Trump was announced as the President of the United States. We've lived with it now for some 7 months since his inauguration, and as you'll recall, the very first two things that he did in his first 2 days in office. The first was to issue his prohibition against all Muslim people from the major Muslim countries from being allowed to come into the United States, which was uniformly struck down by virtually every federal court that's confronted the issue. And the second thing he did was he signed an executive order ordering the completion of the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone tar sands pipeline, both of which run right through the Great Sioux Nation from the Canadian border all the way on down to the Gulf of Mexico. And it's important to remember, as was touched upon in the video, not one single drop of this oil is ever going to go to the United States or to anybody in the United States. It's not to try to relieve any type of emergency energy crisis in the United States. It's going solely to increase the private profits of the shareholders in the partners of the Energy Transfer Partner Corporation. And very specifically, as you may have seen, Donald Trump has now announced officially that this is not really to relieve any kind of national energy emergency in the United States, but is instead to establish full dominance over the world's energy development by the United States. Those are his own words. And that this is all part of a larger systemic challenge that we face here. And I want to point this out tonight because the Energy Transfer Partners is in fact a consortium of the major oil corporations together who have decided that what they're going to do is build a whole series of pipelines around the United States so that they can move all of the oil from inside the United States out to the coast to be shipped out, to be sold around the world. And that he has announced now that he's going to be issuing executive orders opening every single one of the Native American reservations to oil drilling and mining of coal. He's going to open all the national parks and all the national grasslands. He has now also announced that he's going to remove all the restrictions against building drilling platforms all along both coasts and including the Gulf Coast now. He's turned his attention to a massive tripling of the amount of petroleum that is going to be generated and sold into the world market during his first term in office. Now this is all, as we know, directly in the face of the findings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, that we have to reduce the annual amount of global greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by the year 2020. Or else we're going to be wedded to catastrophe, is the exact terminology that's been used. And because of this, the nations of the world, some 180 nations, joined together in Paris in December of 2015 and joined in response to the papal encyclical, which has been issued by Pope Francis, declaring this to be a state of national emergency, pointing out that these transnational petroleum corporations are in fact destroying the world and threatening to destroy the entire ecosystem of our planet. Now, it's one thing to have a person in office who suffers from oppositional defiance disorder, a rather odd president that we have now. But it's another thing for him to basically stick his thumb in the eye of the entire world, who have all joined together to try to stop this massive catastrophe from coming forward, in his total fantasy that this is somehow a hoax that has been generated by China to reduce our industrialization here in the United States. I mean, to state it frankly, this is a mental illness that we're dealing with here. And the person who's in office, and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are jointly responsible because they're leaving this person in office. The Republicans waiting for their massive tax relief, waiting for the elimination of the so-called death tax, the inheritance tax, waiting for the elimination of all of the rules and regulations that have been restricting the laissez-faire capitalist market that has come into the ascendancy again since the end of the Cold War. This is extremely important for us to understand. Everything that is happening today and is happening in Standing Rock is a direct consequence of the withdrawal of Gorbachev from the Cold War back on December 31st of 1991. What I want to do very briefly in the time that I have available, I want to place in larger context why it is so important that this not be allowed to take place up at Standing Rock. To allow them to drill these two major pipelines, which they have identified in this administration as the dramatic demonstration of their capability to crush any type of popular opposition, including popular opposition throughout the entire world, to this massive development of petroleum. This is their offensive move. They have chosen this place at Standing Rock to drill through the opposition. And they brought in a foreign military corporation in Tiger Swan. You saw a brief clip on that. This is a spin-off from Blackwater International. Blackwater International had the head of anti-terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan was Jim Reese, who was the founder of Tiger Swan. His entire perspective on this is a combat against terrorism and potential terrorism. He has adopted the doctrine that was adopted originally by Dick Cheney, the so-called 1% doctrine, that if there is a 1% chance of anything bad happening, we have to conduct ourselves just as though it's actually happening. I mean, this is when you put Donald Trump and Dick Cheney side by side, you know the trouble that we're in right now. Because they've basically asserted that there's a 1% chance that anybody is going to engage in an act of violence against a pipeline, they're going to deploy a full-scale military response. And they're going to crush them with concussion grenades, rubber bullets, pepper spray, tear gas, and 1,000-pound per square inch water cannons atop the Bearcats that we've seen. We've seen 1,000 military in full regalia arrayed in full battle gear against peaceful and prayerful protesters. Okay? And what I want to point out is that this is a clear, logical extension of a program that began the minute that the Bush administration, or George Bush Sr., realized that the Soviet Union was going to be withdrawing from the Cold War, and that there was a major move that was made to invade and occupy the Middle Eastern oil fields. That is exactly what has happened here. And these are the combat troops that were trained in the American Special Forces to go in and secure the oil fields and to hold those oil fields against the Aboriginal indigenous tribal people there throughout the Middle East. It's important to have a larger perspective of this. That I had the great good fortune of getting a full scholarship to Harvard College and studying foreign policy under Henry Kissinger in Gov 180. I was there when they're laying out these plans. I need to be able to share with you some of the inside information here tonight so you understand the larger context in which this is happening. What happened is in June of 1990, approximately 18 months before the official announcement of the withdrawal of the Soviet Union from the Cold War, that George H.W. Bush was given information by the Central Intelligence Agency that they believed that the Soviet Union and Gorbachev who was in the midst of glasnost and perestroika, was going to be actually withdrawing from the Cold War and releasing all of the different republics of the Soviet Socialist republics. And because of that, the Bush administration, and as you know, George Herbert Walker Bush, George Herbert Walker, and George Bush Jr., all of them are all oil families. We all know that, right? What happened is George H.W. Bush, as soon as he got word that the Soviet Union was probably going to be withdrawing from the Cold War, he realized that we were going to lose our ultimate other, our major adversary that had been being used for 75 years to justify the massive militarization of the United States, of having a $600 billion a year massive military budget with 525 military bases all throughout the world. A military budget that is bigger than the combined budgets of 10 of the following other nations of the world, including China and the Soviet Union and everyone else. We in the United States don't seem to quite recognize that, that what the rest of the world clearly sees. And so what happened is on that, in June of 1990, what George H.W. Bush did, immediately upon learning that they thought that the Soviet Union was going to be withdrawing from the Cold War, he sent a private handwritten note to Saddam Hussein through April Gillespie, who was our foreign ambassador to Iraq at the time, saying, because he knew Saddam Hussein from when George H.W. Bush had been the director of the Central Intelligence Agency back from 1975 to 1977 under Gerald Ford. And he knew Saddam Hussein. They were sponsors of Saddam Hussein. Okay? He sent him a private handwritten note saying, look, I know, and mark this, I know that you've been having trouble with Kuwait on your southern border, and you believe that they're engaged in slant drilling under your borders into Iraq and are pumping oil from Iraqi soil into their country. And I want you to know that I want you to resolve this peacefully, but if in fact you find it necessary to resort to the use of military force against Kuwait, I want you to know that I personally would not view that as contrary to the best long-term interest of the United States. Now, we've got a copy of the memo from April Gillespie, hand-delivered to him. Not surprisingly, what Saddam Hussein did is he mobilized 10,000 troops along the southern border of Iraq and the northern border of Kuwait and started to mobilize, to go in. And what happened is his Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, contacted the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the United States, Prince Bandar, and had him come to the White House and said, look, we have reliable intelligence information that Saddam Hussein is getting ready to invade Kuwait. And that we have equally reliable intelligence data that he's going to, after securing Kuwait, he's going to go into Saudi Arabia. And he's going to overthrow the House of Saud. And so what we're offering, what we want to offer to do, is we want to invoke an old treaty that was signed in 1972 by Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, in which they signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia on the way back from China, actually. When Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon were on the way back from the secret mission to China in August of 1972, they stopped in Saudi Arabia and met with then King Faisal and entered into this agreement that they were going to renew that 60-year exclusive lease agreement that the Western oil corporations had with the Saudi royal family. pursuant to which they had exclusive right to develop all of the oil in Saudi Arabia, in exchange for 6% of the royalties going to the royal family. Not to the country, but to the royal family. That's how they became so filthy rich, the House of Saud. You've got, 400 princes with their Eldorados and their, losing $1 million at the throw of dice in Monte Carlo, etc. And so that they made this deal that they wanted to renew the 60-year exclusive lease agreement. And here was the condition, that they would allow the United States, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, would allow the Saudis to increase the cost of their oil, from basically 46 cents a gallon at the pump to $1.46 at the pump. And every one of those additional dollars a gallon at the pump, Saudi Arabia had to agree that they would use a portion of it to dredge out several of their major large harbors to be able to take U.S. warships and build major military bases in Saudi Arabia to be able to house U.S. military troops. And secondly, they had to agree that if in fact either China or Russia made a feint to invade and occupy the Middle Eastern oil fields, that Saudi Arabia would invite the United States to come in and to defend them and bring in their warships and their military. That's what they agreed to. So that was the agreement, that a secret treaty that they entered into in August of 1972, and then they went to stop off to see in Iran. They stopped in to see Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, and entered into a second agreement with them, extending their therefore 60-year exclusive lease agreement. This is something that nobody knows about if you haven't studied about it in great detail. And so what they did, what Dick Cheney did when he called in Prince Bandar in to show him, he said, look, I'm telling you that we have this evidence that they're going to come in and do this. And he showed him real-time NSA satellite photographs of all the 10,000 people assembling along the borders of Kuwait. So when Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait, then Dick Cheney contacted Prince Bandar and said, see, we told you so. And now we told you that they're planning to come into Saudi Arabia. I want you to invite me to come to Saudi Arabia and meet now with King Farouk and Crown Prince Abdullah. So we can invoke this treaty, even though it isn't either the Soviet Union or China invading, even though it's Saddam Hussein, we're going to come in pursuant to the treaty and we'll drive him back out of there for you. Okay? This is all true. This is all true. So he flew over there to Saudi Arabia, met with King Farouk and Crown Prince Abdullah. He pitched the proposal to invoke that 1972 treaty, but the chief of security for the House of Saud, Turki bin Faisal, who was the son of King Faisal, former king, who had been assassinated while he was still an infant, and therefore he didn't ascend to the throne. His older brother did, King Farouk, but he was for 26 years the chief of security for the House of Saud. And what he did is he knew about the meeting, so he approached King Farouk and Crown Prince Abdullah. He said, look, don't do this. Do not invite the infidels to come into the Holy Land. If they come in, they won't leave. So we have an alternative. We have an alternative proposal for you of how to get rid of Saddam Hussein and stop him from coming in. And so what he did is said, let me have a meeting with you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. The next morning at 10 o'clock, Turki bin Faisal, chief of security for the House of Saud, comes into the meeting with King Farouk and Crown Prince Abdullah, and he brings with him Khalil Mahfouz, who is the head of the Royal Saudi Family Bank, and Mohammed Baroun, who's the heir to the richest family in all of Saudi Arabia, that owns all the steel mills and all the concrete mills, that have built the major military bases, actually. And they come in and they say, look, we've got a better idea. Do not invite the infidels into the Holy Land because they won't leave. We have a better idea. Here's our idea. And they turn, open the door, and in walks Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden, the lifelong best friend of Turki bin Faisal, from the time they were 4 years old together as children. And he's got 10,000 Mujahideen, battle-hardened troops up in the Khyber Pass, just got through kicking the crap out of the Soviets and driving them out of Afghanistan. And he's there prepared to drive out Saddam Hussein. And so don't invite the infidels in. So he makes the alternative pitch, an hour and a half, with wall charts and everything showing how they're going to do this with Osama bin Laden. And they leave. But Dick Cheney was still there at the palace, found out about the meeting, comes in, asks for a second meeting, and he says, we've got a sweetener to the deal. Now, if you invite us in to come in to drive Saddam Hussein back up out of Kuwait, we will agree not only to protect you from Saddam Hussein coming in and throwing out the House of Saud, we'll protect you against your own people. We will come in and militarily protect the House of Saud against all of the radical Islamists who are the Muslim Brotherhood, the radical Shia, Sunni, who in fact hate you. With all of your princes whoring around Europe and losing money all the time in this profligate lifestyle that you guys all lead, we'll protect you. And that was the clincher. And that's why King Fahd and Crown Prince Abdullah invited the United States to come in pursuant to the old treaty of 1972. They then ran around and got the alliance of the willing, like Australia and New Zealand and New Guinea, who all came in to join in this massive coalition. Who the United States went in and invaded Iraq and drove him back up into Iraq and didn't leave. Said that, we're not going to oust Saddam Hussein from power, we're going to establish a no-fly zone. It's just going to take 250,000 full-time United States military personnel to be here full-time on the ground in the oil fields. Okay, that's how this thing started. And that's why Osama bin Laden turned and began the jihad against them, to drive them out. And that's why he has the funding of Turki bin Faisal, the chief of security for the House of Saud, and has Khalil Mahfouz, who's the head of the Royal Saudi Bank, funding them. And everybody sits there and doesn't know that in the United States. So this whole thing started at the end of the Cold War because of the oil. Because the oil has been there since the very beginning, the end of World War I. At the end of World War I in 1918, they set up a major commission under the supervision of Winston Churchill, at that time, 1922, who was the head of the foreign ministry he was the head of colonial affairs for the United Kingdom. And they set up a 22-person commission, and they set up these completely artificial nation states all through the Middle East. This has been a tribal territory for 10,000 years, completely disregarded the tribal hostilities and relationships, just put these blocks of countries in there, and then made a deal, picked one of the families to become the royal family. They never had royal families in there, but they did it on the model of Europe, of the Treaty of Westphalia. And so they put in a royal family, made the deal with them that they would get 6% of the oil profits if they would sign this exclusive 60-year lease with them, and then began to sell them military equipment in exchange for part of the money being sold to buy new military equipment. That's what happened. That's what's going on right now. So what's really happening right now, you see Donald Trump playing this thing through. Is they've invested billions and billions of dollars to maintain the petroleum as the core source of energy in the world. And it's the source of their power and their military power. And that's what's happening here. Now, Donald Trump isn't the brightest guy in the room, and so he just gets the simple story. Let's do it. Let's just do it. And push the oil right in the face of the people around the world. And let's try to have an alliance with Russia, because they've got the rest of the oil. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to establish this alliance with Russia so that they have control of all of the oil, and that's what's happening here. So the Dakota Access pipeline is an extraordinarily important, pivotal point in this major campaign that they've got. And that's why they brought in the military. They brought in the special forces. There have been millions and millions of dollars that were expended by the United States taxpayers to train the special forces, the United States Army, and they've all now been hired by private security corporations, like Blackwater International and Tiger Swan. And now what they're doing is bringing them home to protect the oil fields, and to protect the oil companies, and to protect their profits. That's exactly what's happening right now. And they've chosen Standing Rock, because they view the Lakota people and the indigenous people to be the weakest political people in the country. Because if you take the 3,030 counties in the entire United States, that 7 of the 11 poorest counties in the entire United States are there in the Dakotas because of the reservations, because of the poverty that's been imposed upon them. And that they're in a poverty situation, and the fact that they've been able to survive with the kind of nobility that they have, that they've been able to stand up against Trump to protect their water, that they get it. They know that their water is in danger. All of our water is in danger. The water of our planet is going to be destroyed by global climate change. We see the polar ice caps melting daily in front of us. We see the news every other night. Okay? That's 1/3 of all the potable water in the entire world is melting and going into the sea. That is the source of the rivers that flow to the equator. And those rivers are going to be drying up. And the fresh water going out into the sea is changing the salination levels and the density of the seawater. And in fact, the underwater currents that are vital to the maintenance of the temperate zone are starting to dissolve now and float to the surface and dissipate. We are talking about major disaster on the planet right now. And we have a person in the president's office right now who is defying reality itself. And this is just exactly like 1929 in Germany. Everybody can see what's happening. And everybody sits around wringing their hands and waiting for somebody else to do something about this. Waiting for the Democratic Party to do something about this. Right. You know, you'll be waiting when you're wading through water here in town. You know, I mean, we have to mobilize now. We cannot wait for others to come to our aid. The Lakota people knew that. The Lakota people stepped forward, and they have reached out to all of us. They've reached out to their allies around the country and around the world. They've asked for our assistance, and we have answered this. And so people say to me, why would a person who represented the New York Times in the Pentagon Papers case, you know, and represented Silkwood in the case that stopped the construction of all private nuclear power plants in the country, why are you at Standing Rock? You know, and what I ask is the old question that was asked by David Thoreau: why aren't you at Standing Rock? You know, why don't you there? And you still have time. You still have time. Because like I said, Standing Rock is not over. It's not over. They're still prosecuting 500 people. There are 843 people that were arrested. We've now disposed of some 250 cases. 150 of them or more have been summarily dismissed by the judges because they don't have any evidence against them at all. Others have been acquitted in trials. And then there's a smaller group that they're offering deferred sentences. They'll just plead nolo and agree not to come back and participate in any more demonstrations. They'll end up dismissing the charges against them. So some of the people who spent months there on the ground have said, good, okay, I'll take that. I'm not going to end up with any conviction. And so, but we've got 500 people who are standing and ready to fight. And the flagship cases that are going to be fought are the case of Chase Iron Eyes, who is going to stand and fight against them. He was the National Democratic Party nominee for the United States Congress there in North Dakota in 2016. He is the legal counsel for the Lakota People's Law Office in the Dakotas. He has stood there. He knows the law. He knows that that land that he was on belongs to the Lakota people. He knows, basically, that the Act of Congress of 1877, which asserted that it was just taking control of all that land, is completely illegal. It has no effect whatsoever. That there's a 1980 United States Supreme Court ruling in the U.S. versus the Great Sioux Indian tribe that states that it didn't have any effect in taking the land away from Native people. And these prosecutors are so much under the whip hand of Tiger Swan, ordering them to prosecute these people, ordering them to charge them with the most aggressive charges they possibly can, and to go in one after another, prosecuting them, no matter how humiliating it is when they lose. And Judge Schmolenberg, one of the ones who's been asked to come up out of retirement to hear some of these cases, he's now begun to say to the state prosecutors when they come in, say, look, do you have any more evidence against this defendant than you've had for the last 3 that you put in front of me? And if you don't, I'm dismissing this case. That's how we got over 150 cases. We these are just cases where they're showing that they don't have any evidence against the people to convict them. What we're going to do is stand and fight. And we're going to say, we're on this land because we've been invited here by the Lakota people. The Lakota people have title to this land. They have title to this land. And bringing the other people here to sit and pray and challenge this pipeline, you can call it inciting a riot if you wish to do so. We call it an absolute moral necessity. This is a necessity defense, that whatever challenge they had for trespassing or violating orders of the police or whatever, it was absolutely necessary to stop the great evil. The great evil of global climate change, the great evil of contaminating their sole source of drinking water for all of their people, the great evil of moving the pipeline from a route 10 miles north of the 91% white community of Bismarck because they protested that it would contaminate their water. And so they move it down into the sole source of drinking water of an 82% Native American population. Why? Why? Because they could get away with it. Because the people were poor, because the people were powerless, because the people were in fact a minority group, and the Tiger Swan people, and in fact the Energy Transfer Corporation knew that 90% of the people in the state of North Dakota would let them get away with it. We're here to tell you that they're not going to get away with it. A conspiracy to violate the right to the equal protection of the law as you're ever going to see. Okay? And that this conspiracy on the part of Tiger Swan to characterize Chase Iron Eyes as the leader of a jihadist, insurrectionist, terrorist organization is preposterous on its face. And the fact is that they did that to classify them as terrorists in order to deprive them of the equal protection of the law, to subject them to the same kind of anti-terrorist tactics that we have all sat by and let them institute against others. Because we were not jihadists. We were not Islamists. We were not fundamentalists. We were not any of those things, just like Reverend Niemöller said back in 1931, that because when they came for the Jews, I was not a Jew, I did nothing. And I was not a communist when they came for the communists, so I did nothing. They came for the socialists and the labor organizers. I was neither, so I did nothing. But when they came for me, there was no one left to protect us. So don't wait for that moment. Step up and protect the Lakota people, protect their right to clean water, protect their right to the sovereign territory of their own place and their own people. Stand and fight. It's not too late. It's not too late now. So the question always remains, why weren't you at Standing Rock? You still have a chance to be at Standing Rock. Come join us, stand with us at Standing Rock, stand with Chase Iron Eyes, the chief defendant in the Standing Rock case. Here he is.